The Conclave of 12 had watched younger species die for over 10,000 years. They were the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, and they had seen this story play out many times before. A new species would discover fire. Then they would discover the atom. Then they would reach for the stars with hopeful hands and bright dreams. And then something hungry would find them. The Varek swarm had been that hungry thing for almost 1,000 years. They moved through the galaxy like a plague of locusts, consuming everything in their path. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply ate. 17 worlds had fallen to them. 17 species had been erased from existence. Their cities turned to ash. Their histories forgotten. When the Varek turned their attention toward Earth in 2157, the Conclave sent observers. Not to help. Never to help. They sent observers to document another extinction, to record the death of another promising but ultimately fragile species. The humans had only been traveling among the stars for 90 years. They were children playing in a forest full of wolves. The invasion began on a Tuesday. The Varek ships appeared in orbit without warning, their hulls dark and organic, like the shells of enormous insects. They did not announce themselves. They did not make demands. They simply opened fire. The orbital defense platforms that humanity had been so proud of lasted less than an hour. The warships that rushed to defend their homeworld lasted even less. Then the drop pods fell like rain. The Conclave's lead observer was a being named Vareth 9. He existed as patterns of light inside a crystal matrix, and he had watched 6 species die before this one. He hovered in the upper atmosphere of Earth, invisible to both humans and Varek. And he recorded everything with perfect clarity. He recorded the fall of New York, where the streets ran red and the buildings crumbled like sandcastles before a wave. He recorded the destruction of Beijing, where 50 million people tried to flee and died in the crush. He recorded the burning of London, Paris, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. City after city, continent after continent, the Varek swept across the planet like a fire through dry grass. 3 billion humans died in the first 11 days. Vareth 9 had seen this before. He knew what came next. The survivors would gather in small groups and weep. They would pray to whatever gods they believed in. They would lose hope. And then, one by one, they would surrender. They would walk into the mandibles of the swarm with empty eyes and broken spirits, because fighting was pointless and dying quickly was better than dying slowly. This was how it always happened. This was how it had happened 17 times before. But on the 12th day, something changed. Deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, in a military complex that had been built during an older, smaller war, 3,000 humans gathered in a concrete bunker. They were soldiers and scientists, teachers and farmers, children and elders. They were burned and bloody and exhausted. They had lost everything. A woman named Sarah Chun stood before them. She was 43 years old, a former engineer who had designed water treatment systems before the world ended. Her husband was dead. Her children were dead. Her entire life was ash and memory. She should have been broken. Any reasonable person would have been broken. Instead, she looked at the 3,000 survivors in front of her, and she said 5 words that would change the history of the galaxy. We are not done yet. In Poland, survivors crawled into the ancient salt mines and began to plan. In Japan, resistance fighters flooded the subway tunnels and turned them into fortresses. In Brazil, in Russia, in Australia, and 100 other places across the wounded Earth, humans did something that Vareth 9 had never seen before. They did not weep. They did not pray. They did not surrender. They adapted. Within 2 weeks, the survivors had established communication networks using old radio frequencies that the Varek did not monitor. Within a month, they had captured their first Varek soldier and begun to study it. Within 3 months, They had reverse-engineered its biological communication system and learned to jam it. Virath-9 watched all of this with growing confusion. His predictive models said that humanity should have collapsed by now. Every psychological profile, every historical precedent, every piece of data said that a species could not sustain resistance after losing half its population in less than 2 weeks. The trauma should have been too great. The loss should have been too heavy. The enemy should have been too strong. But the humans kept fighting. They fought with weapons they stole from Varek corpses. They fought with traps they built from rubble and wire. They fought with their bare hands when they had nothing else. They died in their thousands and then their tens of thousands. And still they kept fighting. A young man named Marcus Williams led a raid on a Varek processing center outside what had once been Chicago. He and his team of 15 rescued over 200 prisoners and destroyed the entire facility before the swarm could respond. 13 of his team members died. He went out the next night and did it again. A grandmother named Yuki Tanaka, who had spent her life studying ocean ecosystems, began to study the Varek instead. She dissected their bodies and analyzed their chemistry. She worked in a flooded basement lit by candles with equipment she had salvaged from ruined universities. And she began to understand something important. The Varek were not individuals. They were parts of a whole, connected to their hive queen by a biological signal that they could not ignore. They had no free will. They had no choice. They were slaves to a voice inside their heads that told them what to do. And anything that could be controlled could be disrupted. Virath-9 sent a report to the conclave, sent it at the end of humanity's first year of occupation. His message was short and unprecedented. Recommend continued observation. Species demonstrates anomalous resilience metrics. Extinction timeline extended. Further study required. The ancient beings of the conclave received this message with something close to surprise. They had already marked humanity as extinct in their records. They had already begun to forget them. But in the tunnels beneath the burned cities of Earth, 3-year-old children learned to walk quietly so the Varek would not hear them. Teenagers learned to shoot before they learned to drive. Scientists worked through the night, every night, searching for a weakness in their enemy. Humanity had not broken. They had bent. They had bled. They had lost more than any species should be able to lose. But they were still here, and they were learning. 20 years passed beneath the surface of the Earth. The Varek controlled everything above ground. Their organic towers rose from the ruins of human cities, like diseased teeth pushing through rotten gums. Their patrol ships darkened the skies. Their soldiers walked the empty streets in perfect formation, their movements synchronized by the voice of the hive queen that lived inside their heads. They believed they had won. They had made this mistake before on other worlds. They did not understand that humans were different. The children born after the shattering knew nothing of the old world. They had never seen the sun rise over an ocean. They had never felt rain on their faces. They had never walked freely under an open sky. Their entire lives had been lived in tunnels and bunkers, in the spaces between the machine rooms and the hydroponic farms. These children called themselves the Remnant, and the name was both wrong and right. They were what remained of the old humanity, but they were also something new, something harder, something that had grown in darkness and learned to love it. Maya Chen was 16 years old when she killed her first Varek soldier. She was the granddaughter of Sarah Chen, the woman who had spoken those 5 words in a Colorado bunker 20 years before. Maya had never met her grandmother, who had died in a tunnel collapse when Maya was 3. But she had grown up hearing the stories. We are not done yet. The children of the Remnant learned 3 languages before they learned to read. They learned their parents' tongue first, whenever that happened to be. Then they learned the tactical shorthand that the resistance used for communication. a mixture of hand signals and coded phrases that could convey complex information in seconds. And then they learned the clicking, chittering speech of the Varric, because knowing your enemy meant really knowing them. Maya could strip and reassemble a pulse rifle in 34 seconds. She could move through the tunnels without making a sound. She could look at a Varric patrol and identify which soldier was the communication node, the one whose death would confuse the others long enough for an escape. She was not unusual. Every child of the Remnant could do these things. It was simply what survival required. But while the children learned to fight, the scientists learned to understand. Yuki Tanaka was 63 years old now, and she had spent 2 decades studying the enemy that had destroyed her world. Her laboratory was a converted water treatment facility deep beneath what had once been Tokyo. The walls were covered with diagrams of Varric anatomy, charts of their chemical processes, maps of their communication networks. She had learned many things over the years. She had learned that the Varric were not born, but grown in vast biological vats. She had learned that their intelligence was distributed across the swarm, with the Hive Queen acting as a central processing node. She had learned that individual Varric soldiers had no more free will than the cells in a human body. And finally, after 20 years of work, she had learned how to set them free. The pathogen she developed was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not kill. Instead, it severed the connection between a Varric soldier and its Hive Queen. It cut the strings that made them puppets. It gave them something they had never had before. Choice. The first field test happened in the tunnels beneath. So, a Remnant strike team injected the pathogen into a Varric patrol leader and then retreated to watch. Several minutes, nothing happened. Then the patrol leader stopped moving. Its mandibles opened and closed. Its forearms twitched. And then it screamed. It was a sound that no human had ever heard before. A sound that the Varric themselves had probably never made. It was the sound of a creature experiencing individual consciousness for the first time, suddenly aware of everything it had done, every life it had taken, every world it had helped destroy. The patrol leader killed 3 of its fellow soldiers before the others brought it down. And in the tunnels beneath Seoul, the watching humans understood that everything had changed. Not all of the freed Varric reacted with violence. Some simply shut down, their minds unable to process the weight of their own history. Some tried to flee, running blindly through tunnels until they collapsed from exhaustion. And some, a precious few, turned to face the humans who had freed them. Why? The first Varric defector asked, its translation device crackling with static. Why did you give us this? Admiral Marcus Williams, now 50 years old and covered in scars from 100 battles, looked at the creature that had spent its entire existence trying to destroy his people. He should have hated it. Part of him did hate it. But another part of him understood something important. Because we know what it's like to fight for survival, he said. And now you do too. The Varric defector was silent for a long moment. Then it lowered its head. The Hive Queen is in the place you called Snow Hollow, it said. I will show you how to reach her. The Battle of Snow Hollow was the largest coordinated operation in the history of the Remnant. 15,000 human fighters emerged from tunnels all across the ruined city, supported by over 100 freed Varric soldiers. They had spent months preparing, studying every possible approach, planning for every contingency. The Hive Queen was not prepared for an attack from within. Maya Chun was on the front line when they breached the central nexus. She saw the Hive Queen for the first and last time, a massive organic structure pulsing with bioluminescent light. She saw Marcus Williams raise his weapon. She saw the flash of the explosion. And then she saw something she had never seen before. Sunlight streaming through a hole in the roof of the nexus. Golden and warm and real. When it was over, when the Hive Queen was dead and the swarm was falling into chaos. The surviving fighters gathered in the ruins of what had once been humanity's fourth largest city. They were covered in blood and ichor and ash. They had won a victory that should have been impossible, but they did not celebrate. Maya-chan looked up at the sky, at the stars that were just beginning to appear as the sun set. She had never seen them before, not with her own eyes. They were beautiful, and somewhere out there, she knew, the conclave had been watching. The ancient beings who had let her people burn. The observers who had documented their suffering and done nothing to help. "Grandmother was right," she said quietly. "We're not done yet." Vareth 9 transmitted his final observation report that night. His crystal matrix was damaged from atmospheric exposure, and he would need to return to conclave space for repairs. But first, he had one more message to send. Previous assessment of species trajectory requires fundamental revision. Humans have not merely survived extinction-level threat. They have begun to incorporate it. Recommend immediate preparation for contact. This species is no longer prey. Classification unknown. Further observation extremely advised. The conclave received this message with something they had not felt in 10,000 years. Uncertainty. 50 years had passed since the Varrock first appeared in Earth's sky. The world was not the same. Humanity was not the same. The cities were being rebuilt, but they did not look like the cities of the old world. The new buildings were designed to go deep underground as well as high into the air. The new streets had emergency tunnels running beneath them. The new parks had bunkers hidden under their grass. Humanity had learned its lesson. They would never be caught unprepared again. But the real change was not in the buildings or the streets. The real change was in the people. The children who had been born in the tunnels were adults now, and they were different from any humans who had come before. They were stronger, not because of any genetic modification, but because weakness had been burned out of them by decades of war. They were smarter because survival had required constant learning and adaptation. They were harder because softness had meant death, and they were not alone. The Varrock, who had been freed from the Hive Queen's control, had nowhere else to go. Their species had never known anything but the swarm, and without it, they were lost. Some had chosen death. Some had gone mad, but others had chosen a different path. They had chosen to stay with the creatures who had set them free. It was not an easy partnership. Humans in Varrock had every reason to hate each other. The Varrock had killed billions of humans. The humans had killed the Varrock Hive Queen and destroyed everything the swarm had ever been. The wounds on both sides were deep and raw, but they understood each other in a way that no other species could. They had both fought for survival against impossible odds. They had both been changed by that fight. They had both emerged as something new. Admiral Chen Weilin stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Resilience as it approached conclave space. She was 45 years old, the granddaughter of Sarah Chun, and the daughter of a tunnel-born soldier who had died in the Battle of Snow Hollow. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Beside her stood Crix VA, formerly a swarm commander, now a free being who had chosen to serve alongside the humans who had liberated its mind. Its forearms were folded behind its back, and its compound eyes reflected the light of distant stars. "The conclave will not know what to make of us," Crix VA said, its translation device rendering its clicking speech into calm, measured English. "That's the point," Weilin replied. "They've been watching younger species die for 10,000 years. They think they know how this story ends. We're going to show them they're wrong." The conclave station was ancient beyond human understanding. It had been built when Earth's ancestors were still swimming in warm oceans, and it had been expanded and modified countless times over the millennia. It was a place where empires were made and broken, where the fates of billions were decided by beings who had forgotten what it meant to be young. Wei Lin walked through its corridors with her delegation behind her. There were 12 humans and 6 Varric in the group, all of them wearing armor that still bore the scars of combat. They did not try to hide those scars. They wore them proudly. The Senate chamber was vast, a sphere of polished crystal that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its walls. The 12 senior species of the conclave were arranged in a ring around the central platform, each represented by beings so alien that human eyes could barely process them. There was Varath-9, the crystal consciousness who had watched humanity burn. There was Glorix the Consumer, a vast organic mass that had evolved beyond the need for a physical body. There was the Voice of the Symmetry, a mathematical intelligence that existed as equations in the fabric of space itself. They had all watched Earth fall. They had all documented humanity's suffering. They had all expected this species to die. Wei Lin stepped onto the central platform and looked at them without fear. She had faced the Varek swarm in the tunnels beneath a burning city. She had held friends as they died. She had killed and bled and survived when survival seemed impossible. These ancient beings, for all their power, did not frighten her. "You watched," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "For 11 days, you watched our children burn, and you took notes." The silence that followed was absolute. In 10,000 years of conclave history, no younger species had ever spoken to them this way. "We know what you did," Wei Lin continued. "We found Varath-9's observation reports in the wreckage of a Varric data node. We know that you classified us as extinct before the first year was over. We know that you considered us a statistical anomaly when we refused to die. We know that you have done this before, to every young species that the Varric consumed." Varath-9's crystal matrix pulsed with agitation. "The conclave does not interfere with natural selection. This has been our policy since you decided that watching was easier than helping," Wei Lin interrupted. "Since you decided that your own safety was more important than the lives of billions. Since you decided that species like ours were expendable." She stepped forward, and something in her movement made even the ancient beings of the conclave draw back. "We are not here for your apology. We are not here for your aid. We are here to inform you that the rules of this galaxy have changed." She gestured, and behind her, holographic displays flickered to life. The images showed shipyards in orbit around Mars, filled with vessels unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They showed colonies spreading through the outer solar system. They showed research stations pushing the boundaries of known physics. They showed humans and Varric working side by side. "We built this from nothing," Wei Lin said. "We built this from ashes and blood and tears. We did it without your help, without your protection, without your approval. And we will keep building, keep growing, keep adapting, until there is nothing in this galaxy that can threaten us again." She looked at each of the 12 senior species in turn, meeting whatever passed for their eyes without flinching. "The Varric tried to consume us, and we consumed them instead. Not with violence, but with choice. We freed them from slavery and gave them something to fight for. Now they stand beside us, not as servants, but as partners. Do you understand what that means?" Glorix, the consumer, shifted uneasily. "It means you have weaponized compassion. It means we have learned that the universe rewards adaptation," Wei Lin corrected. "You taught us that when you left us to die. You taught us that hope is useless without strength. You taught us that mercy must be earned. We learned those lessons well. Now we are going to teach them to everyone else." She turned to leave, her delegation falling into step behind her. At the edge of the platform, she paused and looked back. Humanity did not break. We adapted. "And now?" She smiled, and there was nothing warm in that smile. "Now you will have to adapt to us." The ancient beings of the conclave watched her go. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they felt something they had forgotten. They could feel. Fear. A century had passed since the Varrock first appeared in Earth's sky. The scars remained, written in the ruins that humanity had chosen to preserve, in the memorial walls that listed the names of the dead, in the stories that parents told their children. But the wounds had healed. Humanity had healed. And grown. The Human Varrock Coalition now controlled 17 star systems. Not conquered, not stolen, built. Each colony was a testament to what two species could accomplish when they chose cooperation over conflict. The great shipyards of Mars produced vessels that could cross the galaxy in weeks. The research stations of Titan pushed the boundaries of physics itself. The diplomatic corps trained representatives to work with species that humanity had barely known existed a century before. But not everything had gone smoothly. The Conclave had not taken humanity's rise well. For 10,000 years, they had been the only power that mattered. They had watched younger species rise and fall like waves on a shore, and they had assumed that this was the natural order of things. They were ancient. They were powerful. They were permanent. Humanity had shown them otherwise. Ambassador Maya Chun was 86 years old now, but she did not look it. Medical technology had advanced dramatically in the decades since the liberation, and those who had been born in the tunnels were determined to live long enough to see the future they had fought for. Her hair was gray, and her face was lined, but her eyes were as sharp as they had been when she had fought in the Battle of Snow Paulo. She stood on the observation deck of the Coalition flagship Prometheus, looking out at the stars. Behind her, in the ship's massive hangar bay, representatives of 12 different species were gathering for the most important diplomatic conference in galactic history. The Conclave wanted peace, not out of kindness, not out of remorse. They wanted peace because they had finally understood something that they should have realized a century ago. Humanity was not going away. And every year, humanity grew stronger. "You're thinking about the old days," said a voice behind her. Maya turned to find Crixvie standing at the entrance to the observation deck. The Varrock was ancient by its species standards, over 130 years old. Its carapace was scarred and weathered, and it moved with the careful slowness of age. But its compound eyes still gleamed with intelligence. "I'm thinking about my grandmother," Maya said, "and her grandmother before her, and all the people who died so that we could be here." Crixvie made a clicking sound that Maya had learned to recognize as agreement. "My people were slaves for thousands of years. We killed billions. We destroyed worlds. And then your grandmother's grandmother gave us the gift of choice." It paused. "We have spent a century trying to be worthy of that gift." Maya nodded. She had grown up alongside freed Varrock, learned their language, fought beside them in the last battles of the liberation. She knew that not all humans had accepted the partnership. Some never would. The wounds were too deep, the losses too great. But she also knew that the alternative was worse. "Do you think the Conclave understands what we've built?" she asked. "No," Crixvie said. "They see our ships and our colonies and our technology, and they think they understand. But they do not. They cannot. They have never been broken. They have never had to rebuild themselves from nothing. They do not know what that does to a species." The conference began 3 hours later. The delegates gathered in a vast chamber that had been designed to accommodate beings of every size and shape. There were crystalline entities like Varathine, who still served as a conclave observer despite his century of documenting humanity's rise. There were beings of pure energy and beings of solid matter. There were species that communicated through light, and species that communicated through chemical signals. And at the center of them all, there were humans and Varrock. Standing together, Maya Chun addressed the assembly with the same calm confidence that her great-great-grandmother had shown in a bunker beneath Colorado all those years ago. She spoke of history. She spoke of loss. She spoke of the choice that every species would eventually face, the choice between adaptation and extinction. The conclave watched us die for 11 days, she said. They documented our suffering like scientists observing an experiment. They expected us to break. We did not break. We adapted. And now we offer you the same gift that we gave the Vark. She gestured to the holographic displays that surrounded the chamber. Images appeared, showing worlds that had been consumed by the swarm before the Vark had been freed. 17 species. 17 civilizations. All of them gone. We cannot bring them back, Maya said. But we can make sure it never happens again. We can build a galaxy where no species has to face extinction alone. We can create a future where strength and compassion are not opposites, but partners. Vareth 9 spoke for the conclave. And if we refuse? If we choose to continue as we have for 10,000 years? Maya smiled, and there was something of her grandmother in that smile. Something hard. Something unbreakable. Then you will learn the same lesson that the Varric learned. The universe does not reward the strong. It rewards those who adapt. And humanity has become very good at adapting. The negotiations lasted 3 months. There were arguments and compromises, threats and promises. Some species left in anger. Others joined for the first time. But in the end, a new agreement was reached. The conclave of 12 became the coalition of 47. Humanity was no longer a young species struggling to survive. They were partners in building a new galactic order, not because they had conquered anyone, but because they had proven something that the ancient species had. Forgotten. Survival was not about being the strongest or the oldest. It was about being willing to change. It was about being willing to reach out to former enemies. It was about being willing to hope, even when hope seemed foolish. Maya Chun did not live to see the full results of what she had helped create. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, human and Varric alike. But before she died, she left a message for the generations that would come after her. My great-great-grandmother said 5 words that changed the galaxy, the message read. We are not done yet. She was right. We were not done then, and we are not done now. We will never be done. That is what it means to be human. We do not break. We adapt. And we keep going, no matter what the universe throws at us, until there is nothing left to fear. 200 years after the shattering, a human child stood on a world that had never known war. She looked up at the stars, and she did not see threats. She saw possibilities. She saw a galaxy that her ancestors had helped to shape. She saw a future that had been built from ashes and blood and tears, and she smiled, because she knew something that the ancient beings of the conclave had taken 10,000 years to learn. The universe belonged to those who refused to give up.